Hey, it's Hunt. You found Hunt on Saints. We're talking black and gold football. Do us a favor. Hit the like button, share your comments below, and hit that subscription button so you can get all of our content. Enjoy. I wanted to spend the first segment today going over the Saints roster as it stands entering the final week of a preseason game. Then you've got a couple of weeks to get ready for the season opener. Still time for folks to make an impact. Unfortunately, for a lot of guys, not an opportunity for joint practices this week with the Texans. Both teams decided not to do that, but they will play a preseason game coming up this weekend, and then you'll kind of get your roster cuts down to your 53 in your practice squad, and you'll push off the dock into the regular season. And I've got some thoughts, and I'll get Sharif's in hour number 2 on where the roster kind of stands right now. And you start at quarterback, and I think all three are going to make the 53. After watching what we saw in San Francisco last year and understanding the nature of that position, I think having Derek Carr, Jameis Winston, and Jake Haener all make the team is a plus. Is Haener ready to get out there and make a lot of plays in the regular season? I have my doubts. He had a nice start to camp. He's had a couple of nice moments in the preseason, but you've got a league average quarterback by my eyes in Derek Carr, and what I would call an above average backup in Jameis Winston, who I wouldn't want to give the keys to my franchise to, but I think can come in there and function the offense should Carr be unavailable. So I think all three of those guys absolutely make the team, and I say that with an understanding. I mean, you would say, oh, well, that's obvious. The Saints are a little bit different there. They're unique in the fact that they've got a guy in Taysom Hill who can play quarterback but isn't really a quarterback. That doesn't really exist anywhere else in the league. I'd rather leave him doing other stuff and bring the three quarterbacks along for the ride. Running back's a little bit of a tenuous spot for the Saints at this point, but you know that Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller are ready to roll. Darrell Williams is in the fold right now, and I think Ellis Merriweather may make this team. I think he's done a really nice job by the media's account in practices. I liked what I saw in the preseason games, so I think he's got a real chance. Kirk Merritt, the injury is really disappointing for him because there was an opening there. You had injuries. You've got the suspension of Alvin Kamara. You've got a chance to make this team transitioning from wide receiver to running back, but he gets hurt, not able to be out there. Could he make the practice squad? Absolutely. I think the Saints like what he brings to them, and he's been there before. But when Alvin Kamara comes back, all these numbers kind of shake up just a little bit. So at this point, I think all those guys are ticketed for New Orleans, depending on if they're on the 53 or demoted to the practice squad. We know that Adam Prentice is a guy that the Saints value a lot at the fullback spot. Not a ton to add there. He gives you a little bit of a hammer there, but it's certainly a special teams guy that can help you there. At tight end, this is where I have my doubts, quite honestly, at tight end. Juwan Johnson is emerging into a real threat in the receiving game. It really is a real threat in the receiving game. Foster Moreau is a proven commodity. He's your more physical option at that spot. He gives you some size. You're not predictable by personnel with him. He can go out there and make catches and has in his career. And then you know what you have in Taysom Hill, and you're going to qualify him as a tight end here, whatever, that's fine. He also gives you that running threat as a specialty quarterback and can line up and be a little bit physical. He's Taysom Hill. He plays the Taysom Hill position. I'm not ready to give Jimmy Graham a roster spot. I hope he's healthy, and I have no idea what actually happened in Los Angeles. And for the purposes of this discussion, we'll just move on from a football sense because they'll certainly have more information than I will. Seizure, medical episode, wandering traffic, arrested. That's an odd story that we'll need some more detail on in time. But from a football perspective, yes, he's a little taller than Foster Moreau. Yeah, he's a lot taller than Juwan Johnson. Yes, he's one of the great players in terms of production in the history of the franchise. Do I need his skill set on this team? At 37, probably not to me. There are other places I might want to use that roster spot. I love what Juwan Johnson gives you in the pass game. Foster Moreau can help you in the passing game. Taysom Hill can help you a little bit in the passing game. I don't need a fourth tight end in a league that restricts your roster so greatly. I just haven't seen enough. And this episode over the weekend certainly doesn't help. Again, you hope he's healthy, but I'm not ready to go there. Out at wide receiver, Olave, Thomas, Shaheed are certainly locks. I think they're going to hold on to A.T. Perry as a contributor, not like a stash on the practice field. I think he plays. I'm not as sure about TreQuan Smith. And I said this last week, and I continue to feel this way. TreQuan Smith is essentially on this team to block on the outside. I mean, he averages like 26 yards a game for his 5-year career. He makes about 26 catches a year. Last year, he made 19 catches in 15 games, 1 touchdown. They got more talent than TreQuan Smith on this roster. A.T. Perry, Lynn Bowden to return kicks. I think TreQuan Smith and Keith Kirkwood may be on the outside looking in. John Trey Kirkland may be the same. Maybe they put him on the practice squad. We'll see. Shaq Davis, Brian Edwards, Kawan Baker. Like, they got a lot of guys that can play. But I think it's Olave. I think it's Thomas. I think it's Sheed. I think it's Perry. And then I think it's Bowden. Because I just don't value that much a wide receiver whose main job is to go block. I don't want to suggest that wide receivers don't have to block, and that's a stupid thing to have on your team, but I think Michael Thomas can block. I think Juwan Johnson can split out and block. I'm not going to ask Rashid Shaheed to go out there and level players, but I'm done with TreQuan Smith after 5 years. Matt's been done for 4. I just don't necessarily think that that's a necessity on this team, and I think you can find another roster spot there. Offensive line, obviously Penning, Ramczyk, Young on the outside. Inside, you got Hurst, you got McCoy, you got Ruiz, you got Pete, and I think Nick Saldiveri is a guy that they're gonna keep around, and I think it's potentially at the expense of Calvin Throckmorton. I talk about that entering the preseason game, and maybe you could practice squad Throckmorton and bring him up. That's not unfamiliar to him. But I think Saldiveri could be the game day guy at that spot. You invest a draft pick in him, a little younger player. I think that works. Go to special teams. I'm okay with Lutz at this point. I think he's made the team. And I was listening to Charlie's show a little bit earlier, and he was chatting with the guest, Chris Rothvoglu, and they were talking about whether or not potentially you could maybe trade Blake Grupe. Maybe you could trade Will Lutz. And they mentioned Sean Payton, who's got a Saints reunion going on in Denver. Does he want Will Lutz? We know Sean Payton and how he feels about kickers. Does he trust Lutz to come into Denver and be his guy? But I think Gillikin, Lutz, your long snapper, Zach Wood, I think that's pretty much set in stone. You get to the defense, you start at the end. Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, those are your starters. I'm mildly encouraged by what Peyton Turner did coming off the edge against a second-team offensive line on Sunday. Tano Passanio, you know what you got in him. I think Foskey is, to me, ticketed for a healthy scratch, practice squad type stuff. I haven't heard really anything positive about Foskey in terms of his work. And none of it's dismissive of his potential. You certainly liked that coming out of Notre Dame, and that still exists. But I'm not dying to have him active on Sunday if I don't think he can help at all. And that may open the door for Nico Lalos after we saw that performance on Sunday. Now, it's against reserves, so it shouldn't be measured the same as getting it done in November. But maybe that's a guy that they trust to go out there and play right now a little bit more than they would with Foskey. A defensive tackle, you know, Shepard and Saunders are the guys you signed. Brzez's going to be out there, and Roach has apparently had a brilliant camp by a couple of accounts, Luke Johnson on Thursdays being one. The question is, what do you want to do as far as practice squad goes there? Is Jack Heflin, Pressamili, are those guys you want to keep around? Maybe Jerron Cage? It kind of depends. I think that Brzee and Roach kind of being your second team there is potentially enough. Linebacker, I think, is where you've had the biggest move in the last 10 days because you brought in Jalen Smith. And he becomes your third linebacker to me immediately behind Amari Davis and Pete Werner. So what does that mean for Nephi Sewell, Ryan Connolly, DeMarco Jackson, Zach Bond, Anthony Orji, that group of players? What does it mean for them? And to me, I might rather have some of these guys active based on the age of DeMario Davis, the injury history of Pete Werner, and the age of Jalen Smith, as opposed to keeping Jimmy Graham around. These are young players that potentially have real potential. You've got an aging Davis, a Smith that you've just signed. I'd like to keep Nephi Sewell around, Ryan Connolly, DeMarco Jackson, and Bond and Orji, maybe practice squad guys, but they're young, really young in Orji's case, and I'm going to prioritize that, the special teams aspect and the depth, even though the Saints generally only play 2 linebackers, over what potentially Jimmy Graham could give you. And then at safety, you got Tyron and Marcus May. What comes of Marcus May and his discipline, we'll see. JT Gray is a lock for the team because of what he can do on special teams, and he's been a contributor on defense at times. Smoke Monday, Jonathan Abram, Lonnie Johnson, Jordan Howden, Ugo Amadi. Matthew and May have played the most of those guys early. And you know that Roby's going to make the team and move up and down, and maybe Howden has taken kind of that dime spot that for a while PJ Williams had taken on. But you've got some decisions to make on the back end there, and then you've got corner where Lattimore's just been sensational in camp. Adebo has just kind of climbed in front of Alontae Taylor. I mentioned Roby. And then you've got probably some practice squad options, I think, there at safety. So big week for some guys toward the back end of the linebacker room, Connolly, Jackson, Bond, Orji. I think a big week for Jimmy Graham to show that he can come back and potentially be healthy. Maybe a big week for Calvin Throckmorton. Guys that are trying to make that active 53. The drama in terms of the depth chart is pretty well settled at this point. You've seen the group joint practices. You've seen a couple of preseason games. We understand who the Saints have coming back, and the roster was fairly set up. And when you bring in Jalen Smith and you bring in Darrell Williams, you kind of solidify some spots that needed depth. Now it's who's going to make the end of the roster. And they've got basically a couple weeks to get that figured out. Hey, it's Hunt. Thanks for watching Hunt on Saints. Before you leave, help us out a little bit. Hit that like button, leave your comments in the section below, and hit that subscribe button so you get all our content right here from Hunt on Saints. We'll see you next time.